On today's show, the Boston Celtics are looking for a third team to take on Jaylen Brown in the event that they trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo from the Milwaukee Bucks, and why it feels like Houston has a chance to be that third team. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The biggest stage in world soccer is here. Let there be goals on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com to get started now. On today's show, we're going to be getting into the rumors around the Giannis Antetokounmpo eventual blockbuster trade this offseason. The Boston Celtics looking like strong contenders to win the Giannis sweepstakes. Not so much the Rockets, but there is heavy reporting around the Celtics looking to incorporate a third team as the recipients of Jaylen Brown in any eventual Giannis trade that they undergo, and why it feels like the Rockets are prime suitors to take on Jaylen Brown. So we'll kind of navigate this all throughout today's episode. We'll take a look at a couple different possible trade packages and what things could ultimately look like with the involvement of the Rockets, the Celtics, and the Bucks all getting involved in a possible three-team deal. We've gone over a version of a three-team deal between these three teams before, but not quite in the way that I'm going to explore it today. There's a couple different avenues to take a look at it today. But I think first and foremost, right, is understanding, I guess, the logic and the reasoning behind why the reporting feels the way that it does. So the reporting came from, I believe it was Ira Winderman, who reported that the Boston Celtics are actively trying to find a third team to take on Jaylen Brown in the event that they trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Which makes sense, right? The Celtics want to try to pair Jason Tatum and Giannis together, elevate their overall ceiling. Which feels weird, coming off the season that Jaylen Brown had. Jaylen Brown had a phenomenal season, but it's understandable if you have a chance to get yourself Giannis to pair with Jason Tatum as opposed to Jaylen Brown, who is coming off of he played like a top 5 player this season, but hasn't consistently been a top 5 player in his career, right? So this feels like trying to sell high on Jaylen Brown move. Plus, there's a ton of money left on Jaylen Brown's contract. So it's one part about the money, one part about, being able to upgrade the roster as is. But it makes sense that obviously if the Bucks were trying to hit reset on their timeline, they don't want Jaylen Brown back, right? Like there's no reason for Milwaukee to try to downgrade from Giannis to Jaylen Brown and staying pseudo competitive in a lighter Eastern Conference. That just doesn't make any sense. So of course, Milwaukee wants back, young players, picks, draft capital, all that good stuff, some of which they can get from the Celtics. And that's going to change a little bit. The last time we talked about the Jaylen Brown rumors, that'll change a little bit about what we're taking a look at today, because if the Celtics are the driving force behind trying to acquire Giannis, it doesn't make sense for them to be able to get Giannis by just giving up Jaylen Brown. Like, that's the thing. You can view this as two different outcomes, right? Is either the Celtics take Jaylen Brown and they trade Jaylen Brown for a bunch of stuff, and then that bunch of stuff gets traded for Giannis. And technically they could orchestrate that. There's like a 1-for-1 trade with maybe the Rockets. And then you go back to Milwaukee and say, hey, we got all this stuff for Jaylen Brown. Do you want it for Giannis? Instead, it functions as a three-team deal, right? But because the Celtics are the ones getting the best player in this mix, right? Giannis is a two-time MVP, still a top 5, top 3 player in the NBA, depending on who you ask. They should be the team giving up, in my opinion, the most in this deal, right? Like, that's how this should ultimately function. That doesn't mean that the Rockets don't give up anything, but the Rockets aren't the ones trading for Giannis. The Rockets in this scenario would be the ones trading for Jaylen Brown. And under that permutation, the Rockets can probably get away with not giving up as many assets as they otherwise would have to, right? Boston has to fork over something. Boston's got to give up a pick or two, or Boston's got to give up a young piece, or Boston's got to give up something in addition to Jaylen Brown. It can't just be the Rockets footing the bill for Boston in this situation. Now, the reason why it feels like the Rockets, not only do they make a lot of sense from the standpoint of having young, talented players, having future draft capital, all the pieces of the recipe, or all the parts of a recipe that you would want as the third team facilitator in this deal. There's the strong connection between Jaylen Brown and Ime Udoka. This is a connection that, goes all the way back to when Ime was first hired in Houston. There were rumors about Jaylen Brown's desire to eventually reunite with his former head coach. Clearly, those two guys are incredibly close. And when you factor in the idea that, obviously, at the end of the day, a coach's job is to win basketball games. Coaches rarely, if ever, care about the future of an organization. Their entire focus is on the immediate here and now. Ime Udoka's entire focus is likely on the 26-27 season and how he can win as many basketball games that season and how close he can try to get to a championship that season. And in order to do so, trading for Jaylen Brown makes a lot of sense. It makes the Rockets a deadlier team in the immediate here and now, even if it does shorten your eventual timeline, even if it does reduce your ceiling down the line, even if it only gives you a 2 to 3 year window to contend at the highest level with Kevin Durant in the twilight of his career and Jaylen Brown in the prime of his career right now. Even if it presents all these complications with money down the line, because Jaylen Brown is owed 3 years and something like $180 million over the remaining lifeline of his contract. Despite all that, these are the types of moves you see organizations make when there's, some pressure being applied to, the coaching department, the front office, when there's pressure to try and win. And believe it or not, even if the reporting doesn't suggest it, even if Ime and Rafael are safe for now, there is definitely some internal expectations of, hey, all right, so you made it to the playoffs 2 years in a row. That's great, but that's 2 first-round exits back-to-back years. If this team experiences yet another first-round exit next season, heads are probably going to roll. Like, that's the reality of it. And the coaching staff knows it. The front office knows it. And we're probably going to see moves made this offseason as a direct result of that worry down the line. And I could see a Jaylen Brown trade being not necessarily a panic trade, but a move in that vein of like, hey, we need to try to win now. And Jaylen Brown gives us the best possible chance to win now, depending on what he ultimately costs. And that's what we're going to talk about here in just a moment. What would Jaylen Brown cost to get in a Houston Rockets jersey via a 3-team deal with the Celtics and the Bucks? We're going to take a look at that here in just one moment. The biggest stage in world soccer is here, and every single match feels like it has the potential for a memorable moment. One goal can completely change the entire energy of a game, shift momentum, and alter the outcome in an instant. That's what makes tournament soccer so exciting, from the opening whistle to the final kick. Now, FanDuel is giving fans another reason to stay locked into every single match with every goal pays. Bet on a match and get bonus bets for every goal scored in that match. More goals means more bonus bets. All you have to do is turn on your token. That's what's so exciting about tournament soccer. You can turn on a match between 2 random teams that you don't normally follow, and suddenly one goal changes everything. The tension builds so quickly that you're invested before you even realize it. Right now, you can head to FanDuel.com, take a look at the odds on favorites to win the entirety of the World Cup. Right now, France, the favorite, at plus 450, Spain right behind them at plus 460, England at plus 700, Portugal at plus 750, and Brazil bringing up 5th place at plus 1,000. So for all those odds and more, head to FanDuel.com. From the opening whistle to the final kick, let there be goals on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com to get started now. Throughout the NHL finals, every single shift matters. Every moment is intense, and everything comes down to execution when the pressure is at its highest. And just like athletes must be ready to perform when the puck drops, a lot of guys want that sense of readiness and confidence in their own lives as well. That's where Rougiette comes in. Rougiette offers modern performance-focused treatments designed to help you be ready when it matters. Their top option, Rougiette Ready, is a fast-acting, clinically formulated treatment that comes in a simple mint that dissolves under your tongue. It's designed for convenience with fast absorption and effects that can begin in about 15 minutes and may last up to 36 hours. They also offer Go Long, which is formulated to support both performance and control for longer lasting needs. It's all about helping guys feel prepared, confident, and in control. In the playoffs, readiness isn't optional. It's everything. And for a lot of guys, the idea of being ready at the right moment carries over into everyday life too. That's exactly what Rougiette is built around. Look, most guys just want something that fits into their life without a lot of hassle. The idea of a small mint that dissolves and gets to work quickly makes it feel way more straightforward than other options. So head to Rougiette.com/LockedOnNHL and get 15% off your ED treatment. That's Rougiette.com, Rougiette.com/LockedOnNHL for 15% off. Rougiette, performance medicine for men. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, for draft coverage, we have the most incredible NBA draft guide for you. It's free. It's loaded. Every single pick in a mock draft with player comps, one-sentence summaries, strengths, weaknesses. It has it all. Know everything you need to know about the NBA draft from the experts at No Ceilings. It's the Locked On NBA Draft Guide. Get it for free at LockedOnPodcast.com/NBA Draft Guide. Again, that's LockedOnPodcast.com/NBA Draft Guide. Continuing on here, taking a look at the Jaylen Brown rumors, the speculation, the three-team possible deal here between Boston, Milwaukee, and Houston. And this is where I think things get interesting, because in the original framework, when we talked about this, we basically operate under the assumption that if the Rockets wanted to get their hands on Jaylen Brown, that they would have to give up one of Alperen Sengun and Amin Thompson. Or Amin Thompson. And because, by process of elimination and because of the Rockets' own internal views on both those guys and Ime Udoka's own preferred style of play, it seems like Al P might be the odd man out in some of these discussions. Now, that's probably still the most likely route for an eventual Jaylen Brown trade. However, it's not completely, entirely out of the realm of possibility that the Rockets could somehow cobble together a trade where they get Jaylen Brown without giving up either of Alperen Sengun or Amin Thompson. Now, I don't think that's even remotely realistic. Even if it's possible, I don't know that it's necessarily a realistic outcome. If you're Milwaukee and you're in this negotiation and you're trying to get back as much value as possible for Giannis, if you can't get back at least one of Alperen Sengun or Amin Thompson, I feel like you failed as a negotiator. I don't even know the Bucks GM's name off the top. Is it John Horst still? Whoever the Bucks GM is. Like, that would be a massive failure in negotiations if he can't somehow get away with receiving one of Alperen Sengun or Amin Thompson back for Jaylen Brown, or for Giannis, essentially, in return for Jaylen Brown. That being said, mathematically, there is a world where you could see the Rockets between some combination of Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, and then filler, Tari Eason on a sign and trade, mind you, and then filler components on top of that, guys like DFS, Clint Capela, things like that. The Rockets theoretically could get up to what it would take to be able to acquire Jaylen Brown and have his salary on the books, without giving up other pieces. And then you could conceivably have a lineup that features Jaylen Brown alongside Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun and Amin Thompson. Although the reality of it is, with the way that the CBA penalizes teams these days, and with how much the Rockets would be paying for that big three, Jaylen Brown would be making this upcoming season. He's slated to be making, where's the Celtics salary table at? There we go. He's slated to be making $57 million this upcoming season. Meanwhile, Kevin Durant slated to be making just under $44 million this upcoming season. Alperen Sengun still on that team friendly deal, only $35.6 million. But Amin Thompson down the line, and that's the real tricky part, is you could make it work for a season, maybe two, right? With those being your big three, essentially, between Jaylen Brown, Kevin Durant, and Alperen Sengun, those being your three most expensive contracts in order. And that's one of the beauties of having Alperen Sengun on such an enticing contract, is you can swing a little bit heavier on on one of your two, on a top end guy, that kind of thing. On maybe your 1A, your 1B guys, if you've got Sengun as your second or third best player on that type of contract. That's what that kind of, contract flexibility ultimately allows. But then depth becomes a serious question mark. Like the Rockets, essentially, if the Rockets were able to do Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, Clint Capela, and DFS, and then draft capital to Milwaukee, and then Boston would also have to include some kind, a little bit of draft capital in their own right, where we're talking about Giannis here, and the Rockets shouldn't have to foot the bill on the entirety of this Giannis trade package. Because keep in mind, the Rockets are trading for Jaylen Brown, not trading for Giannis. So the delta between whatever the Bucks feel they deserve for Giannis and whatever the Celtics feel like they deserve for Jaylen Brown, Boston pays that delta, not the Rockets. So maybe the Bucks want 4 first-round picks for Giannis, and the Rockets are only willing to give up 2 first-round picks for Jaylen Brown. Well, Boston's, covering the gap on those other 2 first-round picks. So couple first-round picks from Houston, couple first-round picks from Boston, plus Tari on a sign and trade, plus Jabari, plus Clint Capela, plus DFS. That gets you thereabouts to Jaylen Brown. But what are you left with after that if you're Houston? You're left with Fred VanVleet, Jaylen Brown, Amin Thompson, Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun as your starting 5. It's a pretty damn good starting 5. Like, it's a very solid starting 5. You're still kind of stuck with 2 non-shooters in Amin and Sengun. So hopefully they're both locked in the gym, getting tons of jumpers up this summer. And Jaylen Brown isn't exactly the best floor spacer. He's not a bad floor spacer, but he's not the best. So that still leads to a little bit of clunkiness. And then your depth at that point is kind of decimated, because then you've got Reed Shepherd and you've got Steven Adams at that point. Or maybe even under the context of this trade, maybe the Bucks would prefer Reed Shepherd over a Tari Eason type, right? Maybe they would prefer that. And maybe the Rockets can keep Tari Eason under this trade permutation. But either way, whether it's you got Reed Shepherd coming off the bench, whether it's, him or Tari coming off the bench, the Rockets' depth is suddenly very much in question. And their only vehicle for adding additional depth at this point would be to have the vet minimum guys coming in, right? So you got to flesh out the entire roster with a bunch of vet minimum guys, with the couple second-round picks you have coming up in this year's NBA draft. That's really it. Like, there's very few other avenues for improving the roster at that point. And that's the dilemma when you're trying to cobble together a blockbuster type trade for a guy that's as expensive as Jaylen Brown without sacrificing one of your other top end guys. Is the Rockets are literally losing their wing depth in both possibly Jabari and Tari, or losing Jabari and, their potential point guard of the future in Reed Shepherd, who knows? It's a tall price to pay. And the outcome behind it is you have a pretty good starting, you have a really strong starting 5, they don't perfectly complement each other. But then on top of that, is your depth going to be able to hold up over the course of an 82 game season? Are you going to be able to rely on the likes of Fred VanVleet and Kevin Durant and Steven Adams to be healthy over the course of an entire 82 game season, with 2 of those 3 guys coming off of major injuries? They're all probably going to miss some serious time next year. If we're being realistic about it, they're going to miss time, and the Rockets are going to need to have depth pieces and injury insurance pieces ready to step up and absorb the brunt of some of the time that those guys are likely going to miss next season. So I don't know if I like that version of that trade just from that perspective, because even if it gives the Rockets a little bit of a stronger top end outcome, it just feels dangerous to bank on. It feels a little dangerous to bank on all of that, but to bank on those older guys staying healthy. But coming up when we talk about the other versions of this trade, this might still be the best version at the end of the day, the best possible avenue to accomplish this trade and to still keep Sengun, keep him in. Also sign up for Jaylen Brown, right? Like, Rockets can figure out the money stuff down the line, but that's the issue is you start thinking about Thompson's contract extension this summer and how penalizing it would be for the Rockets. If you get Thompson on a 5-year, $200 million contract that kicks in, not this season, but next season, man, paying Alperen Sengun $37 million, and then Thompson $40 million, and then Kevin Durant another $46 million, and then Jaylen Brown $60-something million on top of that. That's almost $200 million across 4 guys. And it doesn't necessarily, it's not a guarantee that those 4 guys, as top heavy as that team would be, doesn't feel like a guarantee that team is on paper better than the Thunder or the Spurs or the Knicks, unfortunately. Coming up, we'll talk about a couple other versions of this trade and what Jaylen Brown on the Rockets would ultimately look like and how it would change their play style. We'll get there in just one moment.
I carry a lot of responsibility in my household. If something happened to me, there would be serious consequences. We have a mortgage. We got tuition. We got everyday bills. Those aren't going anywhere if something happens to me. And I know that's an overwhelming feeling, but I'm taking steps to protect my family by getting life insurance through Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast, easy, and 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. And as of March 2025, Business Insider named Ethos the #1 no medical exam instant life insurance provider. Ethos has 4.8 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot with over 3,000 reviews. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LocdownNBA. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get your free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LocdownNBA. That's ethos.com/LocdownNBA. Ethos.com/LocdownNBA. Application times and rates may vary.
And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, taking a look at a couple other versions of this possible 3-team trade of getting Jaylen Brown in a Rockets jersey. I've seen some hypothetical versions of this deal include Fred VanVleet, and I need Rockets fans to hear me when I say this. Fred ain't going anywhere. The organization likes him too much. Ime likes him too much. He's so much of an Ime guy that I would frankly be shocked if Fred is dealt ever at any point, at least under Ime Udoka's stewardship of this Rockets team. And the likely of it is scenario down the line, assuming Ime Udoka doesn't go anywhere, is it feels like Fred VanVleet is poised for like taking on either an assistant coaching gig in Houston or like a front office gig or something. Like they are infatuated with Fred VanVleet here in Houston. So I really don't see a world where, especially after like going through what they went through this past season, not making any moves whatsoever to bring in a guard that might supplant Fred VanVleet in the foreseeable future, that kind of thing. Like I don't see them going through what they went through this past year and then just suddenly moving on from Fred VanVleet in the offseason. That just wouldn't make any sense to me. It'd be quite the heel turn from the Rockets organization. So I don't think there's any version of this deal where you can use Fred as like salary filler for Jaylen Brown in the return package. So that's an unlikely outcome. And then the version of this deal that we talked about before, which is the one that's kind of staring you in the face, is okay, well, I guess you have to give up Alperen Sengun. Now, previously when we talked about it, especially as a 1-for-1 trade, if it's just a 1-for-1 direct deal with the Boston Celtics, then yeah, you're going to have to give up Sengun. You're probably going to have to give up like Tari in a sign and trade. They're going to ask for one of Jabari or Tari. You're going to have to give up one of them probably. And then you're going to have to give up some draft capital on top of that, probably about 2 picks. Like that seems like about fair value, right? Sengun plus Tari on a sign and trade, plus a couple future first rounders. That seems like fair value for Jaylen Brown. The Celtics would probably try to push for more. That's about as much as I'd be willing to give up if I was Rafael Stone and the Rockets. Now, that being said, is if the Rockets are able to slip in as a third-team facilitator to grease the wheels on this trade to be the landing spot for Jaylen Brown, maybe you get away with doing this deal without having to include Tari. maybe the only player that you send out in the deal, aside from salary filler, is Alperen Sengun. Maybe it's something like Alperen Sengun and DFS and Clint Capela gets you Jaylen Brown, and you keep Tari Eason, and understanding that you're going to keep him and that you're going to sign him to a deal and he's not going to somehow walk in free agency. Suddenly that team gets a little bit more potent, right? You have some question marks about your 5 spot, unfortunately, because you're trading out your starting 5. So then what would your ultimate starting lineup look like? And the last time we talked about Jaylen Brown in a Rockets jersey, I kind of fell in love with the idea of Jabari as the full-time starting 5. Like, being completely honest. And look, we saw those pictures recently of Jabari rocking the new threads, the new jerseys, and he was looking a little swole. He was looking a little beefy in those photos, looking like he's added some muscle this offseason. You know, I don't know if he was just like fresh off a gym pump or something, and that's why he was looking bigger in those photos, but people were commenting on it. I noticed it. And I feel like in all the times we've talked about Jabari doing his, season review pod and everything, it just feels like he is best suited to be a sometimes guarding on the perimeter, like stretch 5. Like, that really feels like what his role is his role feels like he'd be best served as a stretch 5 at the NBA level that sometimes switches, but you don't have to rely on him switching constantly 1 through 5, because there are times when he gets switched onto smaller guys and he gets burned, unfortunately, on the perimeter. But he's gotten to a point where his interior defense, his strength, his ability to deal with other bigs has gotten to a pretty commendable level. Like, Jabari guarding on the interior is a pretty solid defender. And he's still got that switchability. He's still got the defensive versatility that makes him such a unique player. And then offensively, he becomes a stretch 5, or he becomes even a 5 that you can give some post-up touches to, give him some face-up touches, let him post up on the low block without, if Şengün's not out there eating up the space, then maybe that's a whole new dimension that Jabari can unlock. Now, I'm not saying all this because I'm like down on Şengün or anything. This is just the reality of the situation. And I'm just trying to walk through what things would look like if the Rockets went this route. And a starting lineup of Fred VanVleet, Jaylen Brown, Ime Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Jabari Smith Jr. is a really interesting starting 5. And if off the bench, past that, you still have Reed Sheppard, Tari Eason, Steven Adams, and then assuming you bring back like Josh Okogie, because he was really good in his limited run this past season. And then, outside of that, that's where things get a little bit trickier, because you're having to combine some salary with the, basically the dead money contracts of DFS and Clint Capela, because you're having to get those guys, mixed into this deal in order to satisfy the salary requirements. It makes it really hard for the Rockets to then turn around and flip some other pieces into another impact player. They would have the taxpayer MLE at that point to be able to go out and sign somebody to add one more like veteran impact piece. They would need probably one more, I feel like they would need one more like tweener, like 4-5 combo, or another another legitimate 5, like a depth piece in case Steven Adams gets hurt. Cause you can't roll into a season where Steven Adams and Jabari Smith Jr. are your only 2 like centers on the roster. Now, maybe they could flesh some of that out with the NBA draft, with the second rounders that they've got coming down the pipeline, pick 39, pick 53. Maybe that's where you add a little bit of that depth. But it certainly feels like the back end of the roster would still be a little tight, but that top end talent, man, between Kevin Durant, Jaylen Brown, and Ime Thompson, that's a really solid top 3. You get Fred VanVleet coming back and he's healthy. Like, the more that I think about that version of that team, it's not anything to turn your nose up at. It's an exciting possibility. But then I start thinking about, and this is from my own perspective. This is not from the Rockets' perspective. And I don't think there's a way you can make this outcome work mathematically is the problem. But there's a world where I'd be very interested in what a big 3 of Kevin Durant, Jaylen Brown, and Alperen Sengun would actually look like. And by saying that, right, what I'm saying is I'd be interested to see what this team would look like if Ime Thompson was actually the outgoing piece in a Jaylen Brown trade. Because the reality of the situation is, as good as Ime Thompson is and as exciting as his potential ceiling is as a player, we just finished year 3. He still can't shoot the ball. The ball handling didn't improve enough for him to be a consistent full-time guard this past season. It didn't feel like it was at the necessary level for him to be a full-time guard this past season. And I have like legitimate concerns about how much more Ime Thompson will eventually grow in his NBA career. Will he just be this amazing, like, defense first Swiss Army knife for the rest of his career, or can he actually continue adding to his offensive repertoire and get to a place where he's not at times a liability on that side of the ball, right? The reality is, like, the Rockets have multiple guys that are flawed players that are liabilities on one side of the ball or the other. Right now, Ime Thompson is the offensive liability. On defense, Sengun is sometimes a defensive liability. Now, he's a sometimes because we've seen him be a good defender, but this past season, he had more bad moments than good moments, unfortunately. Now, some of that is because of him being paired with Reed Sheppard at times, and Reed Sheppard is definitely a defensive liability at this point in his career. But imagining a version of this Rockets team where, I don't think you could get there financially because Ime Thompson's not making buku bucks yet on his contract, and there's just not a way to package Ime Thompson, who's only making just over $12 million next season. I don't think you can get Ime Thompson plus filler and get back Jaylen Brown, who's making 50 cents. You would need a delta of $45 million to get up to the Jaylen Brown threshold if you wanted to center the deal on Ime Thompson. And the only way to do that without including Sengun would be to include Fred VanVleet. And we know the Rockets are not sending Fred VanVleet and Ime Thompson out for Jaylen Brown. That's just, it's not going to happen. And then outside of signing Tari Eason to an insane, like, $25 or $30 million a year deal, even if you put Tari at a $20 million contract, you're still missing $25 million to try and bridge the gap between what the Rockets would be sending out salary-wise, which at that point you're giving up your two best defenders in Ime Thompson and Tari Eason, which probably not worth it at that point. All that being said, I'm still intrigued by the idea of Alperen Sengun playing with Jaylen Brown and Kevin Durant, and I guess Ime Thompson as well, which maybe circles us back to the first version of this trade where the Rockets try to get Jaylen Brown without giving up any of their big three, right? Without giving up Ime or Sengun. But I think that version of the team just gives up way too much depth. Even though the starting five sounds really good on that squad, I think that team gives up ultimately way too much depth and doesn't have enough resources left over to be able to flesh out the roster enough. And we see now that, like, depth is everything, right? You can't just have a top heavy team. You've got to have two stars that are complementary, that work off of one another, or at least two offensive stars that work well off of one another. And then on top of that, you got to have depth all the way down to, like, your 13th, 14th, 15th man to be able to survive the grueling 82 game NBA season. So those are a bunch of different versions of a Rockets Jaylen Brown trade. Ultimately, thinking about Jaylen Brown in a Rockets jersey, right, it would give the Rockets another go-to scorer. It would give them, based on just how we see that Ime Udoka wants to play offense, which at the end of the day is relatively uninspired. Like, it's not, the Rockets aren't playing, offense the way that, like, the early 2000 or early 2010 Spurs played offense. They're not playing offense like the Warriors play offense. There's not a ton of ball movement and off-ball motion and sets and designed actions. And because of that, it makes sense that Ime Udoka would want another offensive guy that can just kind of go get his own, right? Like, if you have individually talented offensive players like a Kevin Durant, like an Alperen Sengun, like a Jaylen Brown, that you don't necessarily have to draw sets up for you. You don't have to draw actions up for you. You don't have to draw a bunch of ball movement up for you. You just put the ball in their hands and say, call for a screen or go ISO, go post up, do your thing, go get us 2 points. It makes it a lot easier to coach offense that way. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with that philosophy, but I see the reasoning behind it, and I can see why it would be enticing to add another player of that quality to an Ime Udoka-led offense at the end of the day. I'm curious all your thoughts on possibly going after Jaylen Brown. Do you like the idea of pursuing Jaylen Brown? Do you like the idea of giving up one of Sengun or Thompson for Jaylen Brown? Or would you prefer the other route of giving up all the depth pieces, giving up Jabari and Tari and filler to try to get Jaylen Brown? Which route would you ultimately choose if you were the Rockets? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.